You're listening to Two Mics and a Guest, a podcast of people's stories and the career pathway that led them to where they are. And now your hosts, Michael Holliday and Mike Young. Welcome, everybody, to Two Mics and a Guest. I am Michael Holliday. Joined with me, as always, is Mr. Mike Young.
What's up? Good to see you.
Episode 20, Mike. Mike, we have had a little bit of a hiatus.
We have.
Between Christmas break and Christmas happening and us gearing up for this second half of the year, we've been off for about a month. It feels weird to take that long of a break, but we're glad you're listening to this episode 20. Mike, we have a really cool guest today. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
I'm looking forward to it. Dr. Phil Campbell is with Jostens and does some speaking and stuff. I know that you could tell us more about how that works for you. He's been a career educator. He's coached. He's been a principal. He's taught, done a little bit of everything. And right now he's working with school culture, I believe is a simple way to say it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk more about that. Welcome. Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm honored to be a guest on the show and excited to have a conversation with you guys here today.
Absolutely.
Well, we've talked about, I've talked to you before we got on about kind of what this is about, is how did you get from here to there, you know, from high school to your current career and the pathway you got there. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump down the road from you guys there, about 30 minutes south of Nashville. Went to Riverdale High School, and something I'm still very proud of when I get the chance to go back and to catch a football game or to catch a baseball game. I do it every time, and it's always funny. My buddies and I always joke too about our baseball field. When I was in high school, it was like horrendous. Like I can't even explain it to y'all. And now you go out there to these parks, like all of the Murfreesboro schools, like I know, and just to be honest with you, Tullahoma, that was probably Tullahoma and Franklin County, because y'all both had the stadium type seating there. And like to me as a kid, a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, that was so cool and so exciting to get to come down there. But just the advancements, the field at Riverdale looks a little bit different today than it did back in 1996, 1997.
Yep. It's amazing to me. I grew up, we had a pretty good football stadium in the state where I grew up. Baseball wasn't quite as nice, but Tullahoma, I think that's an old minor league park they used.
Both Tullahoma and Winchester, Franklin County, use older minor league parks, I believe. Winchester, I think, had the most recent minor league team actually still using it. But at one point in time, we had the Tullahoma Tomahawks.
Oh, I did not know that.
And so there was I don't know what A level they were, but there were a minor league team here. But the stadium was actually purchased, and I could be wrong, out of like Alabama, and was actually disassembled, trucked here, and then reassembled here. So it came from another minor league place, and then Tullahoma had a little thing there for a little while. But yeah, both stadiums are not your traditional maybe high school field or stadium setup.
It's been amazing to me watching the battle of the big screen scoreboards all these kind of things around. All the athletics in high school has come a long way.
It's just insane, right? And obviously being a Murfreesboro guy, I follow Riverdale and Oakland, and I'll see videos sometimes online of like Oakland Stadium, and they've got the Jumpman logo up there and everything, and I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like those kids, they're like, it's perspective. Right? Like they have no idea how great they've got it right now.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
It's all about how can we get the more college level atmosphere at these lower levels now is kind of what we're seeing. Like even us, like Tullahoma this year, we've adopted the Wildcat Walk. So we actually have never done this before, but this year we incorporated a pregame walk down John Olive Boulevard that goes right in front of our stadium about an hour before kickoff. And it's very much like a Vol walk or a Tiger walk, like at Auburn. Like it's like what these colleges are doing. And it kind of falls into this category of how do we improve school culture and excitement level and everything that you kind of help with on a big scale.
100%. And you guys are state champions this year, right?
We are,
yes. We're still kind of rocking the glow of that.
Absolutely. Congratulations. That's a big time.
Yeah, you saying it still doesn't seem like it should be accurate. But yeah, you're right. It was quite the ride this year. Thank you.
Pretty awesome.
Well, I do think I'm glad Michael brought it up. I do think that does speak to your culture. I mean, I go back to my college often for football games, those kind of things. I have regular conversations with friends I met in college. Numerous friends, and I count that up, frankly, to the culture of the school where I was. It created something that keeps us connected, right? Even group texts during basketball games and football games, it's connected back to a culture we experienced there, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's something that I speak about too, is I was fortunate. I had the opportunity to play baseball at Middle Tennessee State, and every single year for the games, they're along the fence line. There's a group of alumni that are lined up there, and it's just like what you're saying. Why do they come back? What draws them to come back out there to that field and to stand there and to watch those games? And it's because they were connected to that experience that they had. And so as educators, as leaders, and this goes into the corporate world as well, how can we connect people to what it is that we're all about, whether that's the schoolhouse, whether it's our business, whether it's our family? How can we create those connections to where people want to come back and line up along the fence and keep watching those games?
And you said that the connection to what we're all about. We need to know what we're all about too, right? Yeah. That's a purposeful thing that we need to do as well.
That's exactly right. And that's something too that I enjoy talking about is, what does it mean to be a Wildcat? What does it mean to me to be a Warrior? What does it mean to be whatever your mascot might be? And I always pose the question, if I came to your campus and I asked 25 or 30 different people, just random people, that question, what does it mean to be a member of your school's community? Am I going to get 25 or 30 different answers? And if the answer to that is yes, then we have an identity issue. And so then the challenge is, let's sit down, let's get community stakeholders, let's get business stakeholders, let's get obviously our students and our staffs, and let's come up with a definition to that answer. What does it mean to be a member of my school's community? Because if I don't have that identity, I don't have anything that my kids and my students and my community can wrap themselves around. So you're exactly right. That identity piece is so strong and so powerful.
I think it's hard for us sometimes to wrap our heads around. We know it when we see it, right? But sometimes we don't know how to get there. And so speak to that a little bit. I mean, we got to start somewhere. I know we're going to talk about pathways from where you started to where you are now. I know a lot of students sometimes, that's kind of the purpose for our podcast. They can't imagine themselves anywhere else than where they are now. And looking down the road, and most of them don't have a just clear 1, 2, 3 step path. In fact, most of our guests didn't have a clear 1, 2, 3 step path on how they got there. And so got a lot of questions in there maybe at one, but you got to start somewhere, and then you got to kind of figure out where you're going at some point. Speak to that a little bit maybe.
Absolutely. I think to me, one of the things I think about a lot, and one of the things I love having a conversation with other educators, how do you get your kids to dream bigger? Right? Because like you're saying, so many times kids live in this maybe a 5-mile radius, right? And that's literally all that they know is the people that are there, the businesses that are there, the direct community that they live in, and that's all that they know and all that they really see. And so how do I get my kids to dream bigger and to dream beyond that? I think an important part of this is really being observant on your campus and looking at the kids that are actively engaged in athletics and in extracurricular activities and those types of things. And then which of those kids are not engaged in any of those things? And then what kind of commonalities can you find there? Is it gender? Is it race? Is it academic ability level? Whatever the case may be. And then how can I fill some of those voids? And to me, that comes through one-on-one conversations of saying, hey, I noticed that you're not actively involved. You don't come to ball games. You're not in any clubs, anything like that. What could we do different to make our school a better place? And then what we have to be willing to do is we have to be willing to listen. And sometimes those answers are difficult, right? Because the kids are going to hit you with some truth sometimes. Because like the truth is we all believe that we're rocking out school culture. Like we all believe that we're doing a great job. And that's not to say that we're not. But the key to me is the legends never make it. It's never I made it. It's always what's next. What can I do next to make an impact on another young life on my campus, right?
That's right.
So there were some different things that we did. When I spent a lot of time at Portland High School, right on the Kentucky border there
Right.
on 65. And, we started all kinds of different clubs and extracurriculars. We started a graffiti club. I know nothing about graffiti. Like, I can draw a stick man. That's as far as it goes. And it is not pretty at all. But I sponsored the graffiti club because I had kids that said they wanted to do it. I couldn't put another kid in my classroom. It was packed. So we get shirts made that said PHS Graffiti Club. And all of a sudden, those kids belong to something.
Yes.
And like we were just talking about, they were connected. All of a sudden, they were connected, and they had a reason to be proud of saying, hey, I go to Portland High School, right? And then that makes it that much more likely they're going to do the things they have to do to walk across that stage and to graduate on time with their classmates. And then that opens so many doors. Y'all know that. Like that little piece of paper. And I would always tell my kids that were struggling, that were at risk, especially my seniors. I would sit down with them and I would say, hey, would you work for, however many days we had left in the school year, 30 days, 40 days, whatever, for $350,000, $400,000? And they're like, oh, yeah, of course, right? And I would tell them that's the difference between having this little piece of paper and not having it. Because on average, a high school graduate is going to make $350,000 to $400,000 more over the course of their lifetime than the kid that doesn't get that piece of paper.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it is let's identify those young men and young women who aren't plugged in, and then let's have some genuine, authentic one-on-one conversations with them as to why, and then let's get creative, right? How can we create opportunities for them to be connected to the school that maybe aren't the traditional things that we've normally done in schools in years past?
No, I think that's good stuff.
I'm glad you said that, yeah, because you think about all those traditional outlets. You had student government, and you had a Key Club maybe, or an Interact or something like that. You have these designated clubs, but then it felt like there were still so many sectors or groups that we probably weren't hitting. And I graduated in the early to mid 2000s is when I was in high school, graduated 2006. I remember a time where if it wasn't a club that like looked good on a resume, no one was doing it. And it was, now looking back, it's like, it's not about what will look good on the resume. It's how we get these kids, like you said, to own their school, to own their community, and be a part of something that's not just this looks good for this. I fully agree with you. And I think now we're seeing that and we're making that change, and it's helping a lot.
I was in Virginia. This was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was working with a group of student leaders, and one of the young ladies said, extracurriculars aren't fun anymore. It's just something that we do to get into college.
Yeah.
And you talk about just ripping my heart out, because it's not supposed to be like that, right? Like it wasn't like that for me. I would assume it wasn't like that for y'all. Like high school was such a fun experience for me. And the kids today, they're under so much pressure and so much stress to make the perfect grade so they can get into this perfect school and to be in every club and extracurricular. And, they think they have to start a nonprofit so that they can get the scholarship. And it's absolute insanity, man. It really is.
Well, for some of us who did join these things, I was in Interact for 2 out of those 4 years. And I remember my mindset going into it was it's going to look good on a resume. But once I got in there, it wasn't that vibe. It was, oh, these are my friends. We enjoy doing this. We enjoy helping community members and doing services and things like that. So it was an enjoyment thing with my friends once we actually got in there. And that's something else that kids need to know too is, once you start doing it, it's not just about, an end goal.
I think both of you bringing up the point that I had a conversation with a student yesterday that was talking about going to college and those kind of things. We got into college resumes and stuff, and she was smart enough and wise enough, frankly, to know that just stacking my resume, one's not interesting to her, and it doesn't seem like that's going to help her get where she's going to be. And I believe that. And I've got a college roommate that we've still remain in touch with, that he's been working at LSU for 25 plus years. And he's working with pre-med students as they move to go into med school. And I was talking to him about, I've got a good friend down at Auburn. Their kid's about to go to graduate high school. He wants to do pre-med. And they were wondering what's going to help me get into the best school. And he said basically exactly what we're talking about. It's not about stacking the resume, but it's about investing in something other than just academics while you're in high school. And I'm assuming you've seen that as you've traveled around and doing your gig, right?
Absolutely. And, it's funny that you say that. Harvard University released a study, I want to say this is about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and talking about trying to shift from this emphasis on academics and academic achievement and extracurriculars and clubs to more of the character education type skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that, because my thing is like, if it's good enough for Harvard, then it's good enough for me, right? You know. But again, I would go back to like our kids today. They're under so much stress and so much pressure to do all of these things, and then you throw all the other things that they have access to from social media on top of that. Man, it's hard to be a teenager. It's extremely hard to be a teenager. My son is 12, and the things that he knows and the things that he understands, I had no idea what so many of those things were. You know, as a 12-year-old kid, probably even as a 17, 18-year-old kid, you know, but just the access that they have. And that makes it challenging to be a parent, because you try to stay on top of things. You try to stay informed. And I'm fortunate in that regard, in that I do work with young people all the time. So I stay up to speed for the most part, but there's still some things that Brooks will say, and I'm like, oh man, I wasn't quite ready for that conversation, you know. But our kids are I don't want to say forced to grow up, but they are growing up. It seems like to me so much faster than what we had to do.
Well, their world is way more accessible to them. Like, they have all of these outlets, and they have these tools, the internet being one of them, to learn so much faster, so much earlier. And you got to be careful with a lot of that. But, you know, to your point, you know, our views when we were younger, we had a little bit more of the blinders on, and if you want to learn something, you had to go get this thing called an encyclopedia.
I'll tell you, it was refreshing for me to hear a student actually say something to the effect of, we're talking about AP courses and dual enrollment courses and credits, and she actually said, I just want to be a sophomore. Like, I just want to be my age right now. And I think too often we're trying to rush kids through some things, and that's where that social emotional development doesn't get a chance to happen. Yep. We can do the academic part of it, but quite frankly, to grow up, we have to grow up, right? Yep. We have to actually go through those processes. And so I think that's another important part of this culture conversation we're talking about.
To speak on that, before I'm in the job that I am in, and now I was in the classroom for 3 years, and I went and did some educator prep stuff at UT Martin. I did online courses through UT Martin, fantastic programs. And one of our courses was all about social emotional learning and how you are with these kids sometimes more often than their own, you know, legal guardians or parents or things like that. And so you're not just someone teaching them information, because this generation can honestly seek this information out on their own for the most part. But what we're now starting to realize is you're becoming more of a parental figure in the classroom, because, you know, if a kid doesn't look like they're eating much or they're not getting enough sleep at home, like you start to kind of take on that role. And that class opened up my world and my vision to these social emotional needs that these kids need in the classroom. That's so much more than just education, ABC 1, 2, 3 informational learning. So, you know, just to speak on that, Mike, I fully agree with you. And, you know, some people don't realize that if they're not maybe in the educational world, is that's kind of what's going on right now. We're having this big shift in education.
PC, how did you decide to go into education? Obviously you did athletics and all of that. What led you back into education?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We were talking a little bit before the show about, you know, some people have this windy road and some people have the straight and narrow, and mine is definitely the windy road. I started out college, I was an engineering major. That's what all my teachers told me that I needed to do. You know, I was fortunate to be pretty good at math. Figured out really quick I didn't like engineering, and then I went into commercial real estate, and then I took a class called statistics, and I was like, nope, we ain't doing that either, right? So I ended up graduating with a degree in agriculture, and specifically in agribusiness. My grandparents live in a very rural, very, very rural farming community in northwestern Illinois. They both spent time, and my aunt, in the cornfields and detasseling and all that good stuff, and the whole lifestyle just fascinated me. But what I found out was I had a difficult time getting a job in that field because I didn't have a ton of farm background and experience, right? So I actually got a job working at Nissan, and that's what brought us to Tennessee way back in the day when I was 5 years old. Was my dad got a job working at Nissan there in Smyrna. So he got me a job there, and the factory life is not for me. Like it is just for my mind and the way that my mind works, it's just so monotonous. You're doing the same thing over and over, and there's hardly any windows in that place. I call it the dungeon. And I was like, I cannot do this, man. So around about that time, one of my buddies, Craig Revis, who's a Tullahoma guy, he was the head baseball coach at Laverne High School. And he asked me to help to volunteer to coach his fall ball team. Because in the fall, the head coach can't coach and all that good stuff. And he said, I'll give you $500 to coach. It was like 10 games. And so at that point in my life, $500, that's like winning the lottery,
that's
right? I'm
money.
like, I'll take this all day.
Baseball, so $500, man. I mean,
yes, life is good. Life is good, you know? And so that's why I did it, was more so for the money, but I absolutely fell in love with those kids, and I fell in love with coaching, and I was like, I think this is what I want to do. So I went back to school. I got my master's of business education degree at Middle Tennessee State, and I became a teacher, taught business and marketing classes. And I was a baseball coach for a long time at the high school level. Then I had the opportunity to coach at the college level. So I spent a couple of years down in Alabama, and then back at Trevecca Nazarene there in Nashville. And around about that time, my son was born. And so I decided to get out of coaching. As you guys know, like, it takes so much time. You're out on the road recruiting. You're a 3-game set over the weekend. And I just didn't want to miss those first sounds and steps and all those things. So at that point, I became, quote unquote, just a teacher. And I went back into the classroom. And my principal came to me. I went to Portland High School. And when I first got there, just point blank, like, we had a toxic cult. Like, it was toxic. We had a lot of issues. And my Jostens rep came into my principal and told him about this thing called Renaissance. And so my principal came to me and said, you're not doing anything else. Guess what? You're going to do Renaissance. And y'all know, being in education, programs come and go each and every single year. And so to me, it was just like, whatever, this is dumb. Like, this is the latest, greatest thing. We'll do it for a year, maybe 2, and be done with it. And I couldn't have been more wrong. It completely turned our school upside down. Our attendance rates went into the 95th percentile, which is a record in the 100 and something years of the history of Portland High School. Our graduation rates went from 81.5 to 92.1, also a record high. Our discipline rates went down by over 80%. Like, we just had tremendous success with it. So much so that then Jostens reached out to me because they wanted an educator that could speak to the power of Renaissance and the impact that it makes. And so I am not a risk taker at all, but that was probably the biggest leap of faith that I've ever taken in my life. So I took the leap of faith and I went into the speaking world. And so now what I do is I have the opportunity, literally, I travel around the world, which is crazy to even say out loud, but I work with educators, I work with student leaders on culture and climate, and how can we create a campus to where every single person believes that they're seen and heard and loved. And that's my whole mantra, is we all want those 3 things every single day. I want them, you guys want them, our kid, every single person on the planet. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be loved. And so what I try to do is equip people with some ideas, with tools, with resources that they can use to see and hear and love other people.
That sounds fantastic.
That's probably one of the most important jobs in education. Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is getting to these kids on a different level. And so that's a hats off to you on going and spreading that message to other schools and things like that.
Sort of going, maybe I'm jumping back to what we originally were talking about with culture again, but we're connecting. Most folks connect very locally, right, with their interests, with the clubs, with the athletics, whatever it might be. One of our coaches, Jared Olive, actually, me and him had a conversation. My last gig, I was working with a nonprofit. It was the Anti-Drug Coalition in our county. And there were some programs at some schools that I was very interested in. One was called Life of the Athlete. They were doing it in several schools around the country. And the idea was, some peer mentorship, basically. And it was about a culture change, frankly, to change what people think is normal for kids to do. A lot of times kids think, well, everybody's doing it. Well, when you, particularly with the drug and alcohol abuse that we were looking at, when we were looking at the data, actually most kids weren't doing that. But the reputation was built around 15%, maybe less sometimes in those schools, but that was the perception of the culture. But Jared said something very wise to me as we were talking about it. Some schools had said it would be Life of the Wildcat, for instance, or like Life of their, and he said, a lot of our kids don't consider themselves a Wildcat. A lot of our kids, and he was really thinking about those kids that go sit in the cafeteria and they're not plugged in that way. Long setup to the question, How do you take those local connections, whether it's a club or the particular table you sit at in the cafeteria, and broaden that out to be about the whole school and help people feel connected to that whole?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's one of those things about, I always say that leadership is about shining the spotlight on other people. Right? It can't be about me. It can't be about my student council kids, but how can I shine the spotlight on as many different groups of people as possible? And so you're talking about those, 99% of schools, especially here in the States, we have pep rallies for football. We have pep rallies for basketball. And then we'll have one that'll honor, our fall sports and then winter sports and the spring sports. Yep. But one of the things that we started doing, we started having academic pep rallies. And they were literally to honor and to recognize our kids that had excelled academically, and not just the straight A's, not just the honor rolls, but if a kid increased their GPA by 0.5 points from one semester to the next, right? So maybe they go from all F's to all D's, nowhere near where I want them to be, but that's a big deal.
It is a big deal
for that young man, that young woman. They're going to get to come in there into that gym and that event, and we have games. We actually created a rock band. We called ourselves the Extracurriculars, and we would perform songs and all that good stuff. We'd bring people up on the stage and we'd give them prizes and just that recognition. And because I want them to feel that feeling of what it's like when they say, now batting shortstop, number 5, Philip Campbell, and people clap for you, right? One of the things that we started on our campus, you guys were talking about your pregame walk with your football team. We started a graduation walk for our seniors. And so right before graduation practice, we lined the hallways with underclassmen, with faculty members, with elementary school kids, with middle school kids, with parents and adult supporters. We would play pomp and circumstance through the speakers. And I would tell them, this is your one last chance to parade through these halls as the big dogs, right? And the very first year we ever did this, I had a young man come into my classroom afterwards. He's got tears in his eyes and he says, no one's ever clapped for me before.
Wow. Wow.
And I will never forget that as long as I live, because again, from the time I was 5 until the time I was 22, my mom was at every practice. Like she was that mom. She was at every practice, right? And here's this 18-year-old young man who's saying, no one's ever clapped for me before. And so again, as leaders, how can we create those moments that matter for our classmates and for the adults? I guarantee you there's adults on your campus that could say the same thing.
That's right. That's right.
Teachers, and so how can we get them plugged in? How can we make them feel, again, like they're valued, like they're appreciated, they're seen, they're heard, they're loved?
Yeah, teachers need that build up sometimes too. They need that, like, not recognition as far as like award or anything, but they need that, like, you're doing fantastic with these kids. You're doing a great job. And it's not just, we need to build the kids up. It's a whole ecosystem you got to build up.
100%, especially right now, right? Especially right now. Like teachers are dying, man.
Yep.
And it's interesting. A great idea that I heard recently, Dr. Joe Sanfilippo, who is one of the best speakers like on the planet. The guy is unbelievable. But he said, everybody is somebody's child. Right. And immediately I thought about my mom, because I'm 42 years old, and it doesn't matter where I am. If somebody takes a picture and they tag me on social media, my mom is going to see that. Yep. She's going to like it. She's going to put a comment on there. And then I'm going to get a text message that says, I didn't know you were in Missouri today.
Exactly.
And I'm like, Mom, like, come on, like I'm 42. Like, you don't need to know where I am every single day.
Can you just call home, Philip?
Right. Exactly. But everybody is somebody's child. And so what if, and you don't have to have the title to lead. You don't have to be the principal to do this. What if you took your class and you found out who's somebody's specialist to every single staff member on your campus, and you picked up the phone and you gave him a phone call and said, man, it's such an honor to have Mike working with us. Like the things that he does on our campus, like it's unbelievable. We just appreciate him so much.
Yep.
Right. I guarantee you that's going to be a tear fest every single time. And again, how do we create those connections? That's what it all goes back to.
Yep.
Well, it's you talk about athletics and practice. It's a practice, right? I mean, we develop the habits and we see the things that we allow ourselves to see, right? And so we can train ourselves to see those things and see those situations. And I think that's important for us to talk about a lot as leaders, as we're working with the folks we're working with, even as we're talking with students. The schools that had incorporated that program I was talking about, the best, the Life of the Athlete ones, they were starting with athletes because a lot of times you already have a structure there. But it was students leading students more than old fart coach or somebody coming in and preaching at them to what to do, right? the culture changed when these students found out that they can influence other students. Yep. One, they realized the confidence that I can do this, and then them being able to notice and practice yep. that as they walk through the halls of the school, as they sat down at the table in the cafeteria. Yep.
So true. I think every single kid is an influencer. The question is, do they use that positively or do they use that negatively? Right? Are they going to use it to see the kid that's sitting at the table by themselves, or are they going to use it to be one of the kids that's going in and doing the TikTok garbage in the bathrooms? Right. We're all influencers. What do we do with the platform? Mm-hmm. Right? How do you use your platform? How do you use your voice?
Who's your audience and how do you use it? Yep.
Well, and that also gets 100%. Back to what we talked about is what kind of culture do we want to have, right? I mean, the positive and negative. You talked about the high school you came into, pretty toxic culture, yep. and that was able to shift. And then to have them be an influencer toward that identity yep. is a big deal. So I think that's important. What we've talked about a lot of stuff. You're looking back on your career, and you've done a lot of different kind of things. What would you have told that high school baseball player back in the day?
Man, I don't even know. Yeah, go with the flow. You know, so much of my life, so much of my identity was wrapped up in baseball. Like that's who I was. I was a baseball player. I was a baseball coach. And still to this day, I love the game of baseball. Right. Like when I go to a big league park and you're walking through that tunnel for the first time and you lay eyes on the field, like I still get chills and I'll tear up sometimes. Right. Like it means that much to me. But I had to figure out who I was without the game of baseball. Yep. And that was a challenge. I struggled for a couple of years without that identity. And it was like, okay, well, who is Philip Campbell? Right. So I think I would say to be willing to go with the flow, understand that sometimes your dreams are going to change for different reasons. Sometimes roads get blocked off. Sometimes life happens. Sometimes things get in the way. Right. And sometimes you just get down a road and maybe you realize this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I've got to go a different direction. Yep. But how can I pivot? And I think along those lines, something that I think that educators need to hear, and I think especially that young people need to hear, is there's so much pressure on what are you going to major in, right? What's your ACT score? What is your GPA? What is this? What is that? And I always say on all the job interviews that I've ever been on, you know how many times anybody has ever asked me my ACT, my English 3 end of course score, if I had an honors diploma from Riverdale High School, my GPA from college, any of those things, 0. That's right. When you're looking for a doctor, when you're looking for a contractor to build a deck on your house, right? You're not calling them and asking them for their, how'd you do in algebra 2? Exactly. You want a high character person that's going to show up, that's going to be honest, that's going to have integrity, and that's going to get the job done in a timely manner. Right. And so who are you as a person? I could care less what your major is. I could care less about all the accolades and all the clubs and all those things, whatever. But who are you at your core? Because if you're a good person, I believe you're going to win.
I think that's fantastic.
It is, yeah.
I've had conversations with students. We're doing a lot of orientation stuff right now with new students for this semester, but that comes up a lot. Frankly, in my gig with career and graduation coach, some of the first things people are talking about is what they're going to major in, what they're going to do. And it's and most of them find that a difficult thing to talk about. One thing that you said, too, that I want us to touch on a little bit before we close out is your identity was wrapped up in this one thing that you loved. And on the surface, man, it's great to have something you love, right? It's great to be a part of something like that. But more and more, when we lose those things or they don't fulfill the dream that we wanted to have, we don't know where to go with that. We've had this story come up several times with different guests. I'd love you to speak to that, because at the point where you lost that identity, you've got to reconstruct another identity. And sometimes that's the catch for people is how do I reconstruct that?
Or the panic moment of
what am I going to do? And who am I, frankly, because I've identified myself that much. I've had this conversation a lot of times, and I even had a conversation with a kid who had a chronic condition, a disease, and we had to have the conversation about this doesn't have to define you, right?
Yep.
It's a question of identity. Can you speak to that a little bit about how how do you reconstruct your identity when you lose something important like that?
Man, you're putting me on the spot here big time. This is like if I can answer this one well, maybe I can write a book on or something, I think, and I wish that I had the diagram.
And I'll say this to kind of let you off the spot. If you came back with an answer, this is the answer of how to do that, we would probably just cut that part out of the podcast because, that's not the thing. But as you've lived life, just speak to your experience of doing that. I mean, it's not a definitive answer because we're all different human beings.
Yeah, it could be different for different people. Yeah,
absolutely. So one of my good friends, his name is Mike Smith, and he's one of the best youth speakers like on the planet. The guy is unbelievable. But one of the activities that he put me through when he was training me was he made me put my name in the center of this piece of paper in a circle. And then off of that, I would put spokes with other circles of the different things that I was going to be or that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So speaker, podcaster, YouTuber, father, right, brother, like all the different things. Mm-hmm. And then he said, but everything has to come back to that center circle, right? Mm-hmm. You are not a speaker. You are not, in the past, a baseball coach. Yeah. Right. But that in my mind, that's where I was. And right, so he helped me really shift that mentality to seeing like, okay, who are you at your core? Yeah. And then these other things are just spokes on the wheel. Mm-hmm. And so that really helped me with that entire process and of coming to peace with not having baseball in my life every single day. Mm-hmm. And again, that may not work for everybody. It may work for some people. I don't know, but it was just an eye-opening activity for me. I had to put myself right there in the center, and then everything else is a spoke off of that. Right. And sometimes those spokes are going to change. Maybe the podcast doesn't work out. Maybe the YouTube channel doesn't work out. Maybe the book that I write doesn't sell very well. Right. But at its core, who is in that center circle? And so that was something, like I said, very eye-opening for me and really helped me to realize, okay, who am I as an individual? And then that goes back to those character and to those soft skills. Right. Like I want to be somebody, I always talk with educators about your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? Well, I want to be remembered as somebody that was caring and that was kind and that was loving and that always put others before myself. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that, again, shine that spotlight on as many different groups of people as possible. I want to be somebody that saw the kid that nobody else saw. Yep. And maybe not me, but maybe I gave somebody else a tool or a resource to give them an opportunity to open a door that maybe they wouldn't have had without. Mm-hmm. Yep. Because our kids, you don't get to choose your zip codes. You don't get to choose your socioeconomic status. You don't get to choose, your race, your nationality, who your parents are, who your parents aren't, right? So what can we do? This equity, there's a whole huge conversation in the world, and we could talk about this for hours, right? But what can we do as leaders? Because we're put in a position of leadership. What can we do to provide them with the opportunities to be successful? Yep. And to me, I hope that's how I'm remembered.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm going to just use me as a reference, but this is not about me at all. I asked myself my first year going into teaching, the same question is, how am I going to positively affect these kids' lives? And what I went to in my head was, let me think back to when I was in high school and think about that 1, 2, 3, however many teachers it was that I remember the most, the ones that I enjoyed their class the most because of this. And starting out, I by no means was anywhere near their level, I feel like, but I tried to take little bits and pieces from those teachers that maybe asked me how I was actually doing, or maybe they came to my sporting events more than some other teachers. I tried to, reverse engineer that. And that's a really great point that you brought up. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're someone's employer at work, whatever your profession is, it's so important to analyze yourself and to ask those questions and to think about those spokes on the wheel of, you're the hub. The spokes are just, there to help support you, but they're not you.
You or Mike could write that book, man. That's a pretty good answer. It's a good thing to work on from that. I think we talked a lot about people first language in several gigs, and sometimes folks don't understand what that's talking about. Instead of saying somebody is a baseball player, they're a person who plays baseball, and that gets awkward at certain times. But even if you don't say that out loud, I think thinking human being first and then what they're doing is a different way to do things, and it's a helpful practice for me anyway, for doing what you're talking about. And to the point, and I'd like you to comment a little bit on that before we close out, is we talked about seeing that circle and the spokes. The problem for a lot of us when we're leaders, if I'm coaching a soccer team, I tend to see the soccer player first before I see the human being. Sometimes I'm looking at my keeper. I'm looking at my center mid.
It's right there in front of you. It's easy to do that.
I tend to start with what they're doing before I see the person out there playing, right? And that's a practice as leaders that we have to work on as well.
Yeah. That's something one of the things I like to say is you have to be intentional.
That's right.
And that's hard. It's hard to do, right? Because we get so caught up, especially at the high school level and especially in Middle Tennessee where the sports are like, it's a different level than a lot of places,
that's
you know, and it's about winning. Like there's legit pressure to win on coaches. And so, it's easy to get caught up in, we messed up this bunt coverage yesterday. Like we're going to get this thing right, as opposed to saying, hey, John, I noticed you've been kind of quiet, man. Like, is everything okay at home? Like what's going on, right? We have to be intentional about those things. And I think a big part of being intentional with other people is we also have to be intentional with ourselves.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
We have to make the time for ourselves. One of my buddies, Phil Boyd, who's another phenomenal speaker, he was talking to a room full of educators and he said, we do a great job of loving our kids. We do a great job of loving our colleagues, but wouldn't it be cool if we could love ourselves?
Absolutely.
And I'm sitting in the back of this room just crying, right? Because I'm just like, take the dagger out of my heart, man. Because the rock stars on your campus, we pour so much of our time and our hearts and our effort into other people that a lot of times we forget about that person in the mirror. Yep. And so again, I'm going to go back to, we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional about ourselves first, and then we have to be intentional about building those relationships and continuing to cultivate those relationships day in and day out with the people that we work with.
That's fantastic.
It is a great message.
Good stuff.
Phil, where can people, if I'm a teacher or I'm a school or school system, how do I reach out to you? How do I get you to come talk to my whole school or my staff, or how can they reach you? A website, social media? What we got here?
Absolutely. So I'm on social media. It's at Dr. Phil Campbell. That's Twitter, that's Facebook, that's Instagram. It's actually even TikTok now. I'm kind of taking a leap there into that.
Fantastic.
So you can find me there, or you can find me on the internet at drphilcampbell.com. Love connecting with educators, love connecting with student leaders. So anything that I can do to help, more than happy to do so. Please reach out.
We'll put all those links on our show notes and stuff as well, if you'd like. Yep. Anything we haven't asked you about that you want to tell us about?
Oh man, we've talked about a lot. This has been awesome. This has been one of my favorite podcasts that I've been on, man. You guys are great. I would just say to the educators that are listening to this right now, like, I know that it's hard. Like I get it. And it's hard literally all around the world. Like I've got educator friends in Europe and in Asia, and it's a struggle right now. And I think, why did you get into this in the beginning? Right? Even outside of a pandemic, but why did you get into this in the beginning? And we all got into it to make a positive impact and to change lives.
That's right.
And somehow we've got to find a way, as hard as it is, as challenging as it is, somehow we've got to find a way to remind ourselves of that why each and every single day. And it's literally just one day at a time. Yep. Because I know a lot of people are burnt out, they're beat up. Some of the best are leaving the profession altogether. Right. And if that's what you need to do, then again, you have to be intentional about yourself first.
That's right.
But I would just challenge you to remember your why. And again, I hope that's to love kids and to put kids in a position to be successful and let the rest of the things take care of themselves.
That's a great way to close this out. I really appreciate that. And PC, we really appreciate it. I'm glad you came on here to be a guest with us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, man. You guys keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. This has been episode 20 of Two Mics and a Guest. We will see you guys next time.